Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and today we're going to talk a little bit about corporate personhood, and we're going to talk about how corporations function within the law. Corporate personhood, as we remember, is the idea that corporations existing as organizations are due certain rights as artificial persons, right? The corporate form needs this artificial personhood to be able to efficiently buy and sell property, to be able to be sued by consumers, to be able to exercise certain rights. And then extending from that corporate personhood, we've got the idea that corporations, as a type of artificial person, are due constitutional rights, which are also held by natural people, such as freedom of speech, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, equality under the law, as far as, corporate law comes. So that's what we'll be talking a little bit about today. The way this talk's going to go is I'm going to talk about 4 articles that were presented to me, and then I'm going to give some of my overarching thoughts on them. Going in chronological order, we're starting with our first article. That's Bray from 2010, and it's a description of a debate between 2 scholars. They're both talking about corporate personhood. Greenwood argues they're not individuals and they shouldn't get personhood. They shouldn't have rights extending out beyond what the individuals are due constitutionally. Ribstein argues corporations are collections of people. There's an agreement between Ribstein and Greenwood that they're just collections of people. But Ribstein argues that government can't have unlimited power, right? The government has to have limits in place, so that's why we have to give corporate persons those rights. Williamson presents interview snippets from Kitch, Showers, Schrager, and Mahoney, and they talk about corporate personhood, and they talk about, what is going on with that. And they all seem to agree that corporations are due certain rights, but that because they're not natural persons, that they need more regulation. And they talk a little bit about the birth of the corporate charter, right? Back in the early 1800s here in the U.S., corporations that were formed were usually formed for the public good, and they were formed under a charter. That they were granted a charter. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that idea of the charter, and perhaps the charter needs to return, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. Next, we have Totenberg talks about the history of corporate personhood, starting with the Catholic Church. Totenberg reckons that the Catholic Church was really the first entity to want to exercise corporate personhood. It needed to be able to hold land in perpetuity, and it needed to be able to hold property and materials in perpetuity that would pass down, whether there was a change in the priesthood or whether there was a change in the nunnery or whatever. Because you think about it, if you are running a monastery, you might have monks that are coming in and then monks that are leaving, and you have to, every time they're coming in and going, you have to have this transfer of property. So having, a church as a type of corporate person would allow them to do that, easily. And, we're talking, medieval times, right? We're talking about this first corporate personhood idea coming about, in medieval times. And Totenberg's article goes all the way up to, at the time, which was fairly recent, the Citizens United decision, which allowed corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money in elections because that's their First Amendment right. And, to put limits on them would be to limit their free speech. And this was a decision where the court was split. It was a 5-4 decision. So it was close, and I think there's probably good arguments on both sides for Citizens United. On the one hand, yes, corporations are collections of people that are due certain rights within our system of government, yes. But I don't see why it's necessary for a corporation to be able to spend an unlimited amount in an election, right? Why couldn't the owners of the corporations or whatever other political individuals spend that money themselves? Why does it have to go through a corporate form to be able to do that? To my mind, it just seems a little off, right? We've got this democratic republic, but we're basically letting corporations come in as an aristocratic class and be able to domineer elections away from individuals. Then we get Pruitt, who describes a history of the 14th Amendment and corporate personhood, right? So the 14th Amendment talks about equal treatment under the law. And it became especially useful when dealing with corporations, with some corporations getting special treatment over others and making sure they're all treated equally under the guise of the law. And it evolved over time. According to the article, it was one of the most cited constitutional amendments in U.S. legal history. So, with all that being said, we can see why corporations want to use that to their benefit. The end of the article talks about disagreement over Citizens United. Not necessarily the point of this presentation, but, it's good to know. So what do I think about corporate personhood? I think, honestly, corporate personhood makes sense, right? You have these artificial, fictitious persons, and they need to be able to function within the law, right? And the easiest way for them to do that is with this artificial personhood. We can have this kind of fiction where we say, okay, we know that Coca-Cola is not really a person, but it makes sense for us to say that Coca-Cola can own this land, Coca-Cola can be sued, Coca-Cola can own a patent, right? Those things make sense, because if not, it creates a whole bunch of legal back end. And that's something that was mentioned in a couple of articles. If corporate personhood disappeared tomorrow, we'd have to go back to the older way of doing things where everything's done through a trust. And, instead of being able to sue, say, Pepsi for giving you a faulty product or something, you'd have to sue individual shareholders of Pepsi. And it can become a real mess. With all that being said, I do think that corporate personhood is good. I do think it's necessary for a efficient business operation in the world. What I don't think, and this is, I guess, where my disagreement comes in, is that organizations do need some freedoms, and the government cannot have unlimited power. I agree, 100%. But those freedoms should not correlate to the rights of natural persons, right? Because natural people do things that corporations don't. They have kids, they have families, they love, they hurt. Corporations don't do those things. A difference, right? We think about a family, natural persons, right? One of the family members gets sick. Everyone else, mom and dad and everyone is going to sacrifice everything they can to take care of them, right? We think about a corporation. We think about if a member of Coca-Cola gets sick, a staff member, once they have reasonable justification to get rid of them, they will. Obviously, you can't fire someone just for getting sick, but a lot of HR people, a lot of corporate people behind the scenes will look for that excuse, right? Because they're not producing at the level that they're expected to or that they want them to. We can see immediately there that the way the corporation operates in the world is different from the way the person operates in the world. A person will risk life and limb to take care of those things that are important to them. Corporations won't really do that, right? A corporation, if it's being run properly and efficiently, will not risk its existence as an entity for some moral cause. And because a corporation is not capable of having a moral cause the same way that an individual is, and because a corporation is not willing to make the sacrifices that a person is willing to, they do not deserve the same rights and freedoms as a person does. Now, obviously, we can't have governments coming in and just seizing all of their computers, and they have to have some amount of free speech, but should they be able to put unlimited amounts of money into election? I don't think so. Should corporations be able to operate with impunity in relation to, their functions in the economy? I'm not sure. I'm kind of doubtful. And that's one of those things where, I talk about the return of business charters, right? So it used to be corporations were formed for the general good of the public. And I think that there's something there that needs to return. Our society needs that. We look around America today when we can see that the society is sick. We can see that there are these problems. We can see that there are things that are not getting done. And I think corporations can be some of the ones to help us solve that. But the problem is they have to be working as members of the community. They have to be working for the general good. It can't just be the case that if you've got a factory that employs 10,000 people and you find out that you can produce all your goods 10% cheaper by shipping it off somewhere else, that you close that factory and put those people out of jobs, right? Because as a corporation, that does not make you a good citizen, and that does not make you a good member of society, right? Because if an individual person did that, we would not think very highly of them. We would think that they were, the scum of the earth. So when it comes down to it, if corporations want these additional rights, if they want these protections, then they should have to function for the public good. It's not just enough to be making money for shareholders. And I know people will say, well, Milton Friedman says, Chicago School of Economics, business only exists to produce profit for shareholders. Like, hey, I know Milton Friedman said that, but, even Milton Friedman was wrong sometimes, right? Some of his ideas, for example, on the way that the economy functions do make sense, right? That there are times when it is good to do deep spending cuts, but that's not all the time, and that's not every single case. And when it comes to the role of business in society, it can't be that large corporations are free to act in society in ways that we wouldn't accept our local baker doing, right? Imagine you live in a small town or a small village and you have one local baker and he makes bread for the village. If he decided to just randomly jack up the prices of his bread to, just line his own pockets, you wouldn't say, oh, yep, so happy we've got this good local baker. You'd say, oh no, he's scum. He's out here just trying to fleece us. Or think of a small local landlord, right? If your landlord treats you as a respectable person and, they keep your rent at a reasonable rate, then okay, that's good. They're providing a good service. But if they come in and they double your rent just because, well, are they being a good community member? Are they doing things that you would expect good community members to do? I don't think so. And for too long, we let these large corporations go around and do things that we wouldn't let a small mom and pop shop do. And if we're holding the small mom and pop shop to a higher standard, then why shouldn't we hold the large corporation to that higher standard? Why shouldn't we expect the large corporation to be a good citizen, right? Because the free market is not an immoral market, right? When companies found out about the harms of the blood diamond trade, pretty much universally, they all pulled out of any kind of blood diamond mining, at least publicly. They all pulled out. And the market punished those who were slow to do so. So we can see that the market, as an extension of individual choices in spending money, is a moral market. And I think the next step of that morality is to require corporations to be good citizens and to require them to be good members of the community, because we see what happens when they don't. We see the negative outcomes that people are faced with. We see the rampant poverty. We see the rampant wage stagnation. People give unions a lot of crap, but when it comes down to it, unions are the ones that secured an American middle class. As unions have faded, we've relied more for corporations to do that. But here's the thing, shareholders of corporations aren't going to share the profits of the company with the workers unless they're forced to. And in the same way, a corporation's not going to be a good corporate citizen unless it's forced to. The market is a game with rules, and if you make the rules have certain requirements, corporations will adapt. If you don't set those rules in place, then it will go down to the lowest common denominator. Yes, there will still be companies practicing corporate social responsibility. Yes, there will still be companies that are doing good in society. But that won't be the majority, and that won't be the average person's interaction with a corporation. So with all that being said, in sum, wrapping it all up, corporate personhood is a good and valuable idea. But those persons need to act as good members of the community. They need to act in ways that would bring pride to the community and pride to the country if they acted in those ways. You can't be a person and still put profits over other people. You can't be a person and still want to, milk society for every last penny. You have to have some moral framework to guide you. And for too long, corporations have existed without that moral framework. So, in sum, I hope you all appreciated this talk, and I hope that it helps you all. I'd be real curious to hear what you think. I'd be real curious to have further discussion about this. You have a wonderful day.